It's 1-1, sports fans. India won, Australia won. That's how 1-1 works, in case you're not sure, or you're not sure about what series we're talking about. It could be Bangladesh, West Indies. That was a fantastic series as well. It's not, because this one has 3 more tests to go, so we're going to keep talking about this. We did a video. In fact, this is the video. I haven't even had time to rub it off my board yet, because of course this last test went for about 8 minutes. So this is literally the video that we did before the test match, where we were looking at something very simple. Is it real? There are all these different factors that allowed for India to win that first test, and we looked at how they were going to go. And I thought it's actually worth going back and marking the report card here and see exactly what happened with Australia beating India in this second test. And that is why Nasser Hussain decided to bowl first at the Gabba. And this all, of course, reminds me of Hit Wicket, which is a mobile cricket strategy game that is all about making those tough decisions. Who do you want to send in as an opener when the asking rate is climbing? Do you go for the big hitter or the steady accumulator? Me, I like to throw in someone a little bit unorthodox. A bit of a wild card like the general. That keeps the opposition guessing. And what about the bowling attack? Do you unleash your express pace early or hold back for the death overs? I'm always tempted to bring on a mystery spinner in the middle overs and just try and break a partnership. Hit Wicket puts you in the captain's chair. You draft the squad and select the batting order and even decide when to use those game-changing abilities. Do you burn your 2x ability to chase down a big total, or save it for a critical moment later on? It's strategic, it's addictive, and it's more nerve-wracking than facing a Shoaib Akhtar bouncer. Give it a go. Download Hit Wicket and see if you've got the tactical nous to win. So we started off with form, and I said there would be a regression and Australia would come back into form and India would lose form a little bit. I don't think there's anyone who's going to argue with that one all that much. So we definitely know in that case that that's what happened with Australia. Team, we said that India could get a little bit better, and we said that Australia would get a little bit worse. Well, Australia got a lot worse, actually, because of Josh Hazlewood. But that didn't matter all that much in the end. So that one's almost negligible. The Adelaide day-night test. It's such a unique test match, isn't it? It's not just that you're playing a day-night test match and a lot of teams aren't used to it. It's specifically that Australia are used to playing day-night test matches. And of course, there's a player that we might talk about later on as well, who really likes this wicket. We had this as a double plus because for India, I always thought this was a bit of a free swing, this test match. So I've got no issue with the fact that they lost it, because they were always a big chance of doing that because Australia's been so good there. But again, obviously, we thought that Australia would win that. So that's another thing that went in Australia's favour. In fact, let me go back and cross this out because it didn't really go in India's favour, but it was a bit of a free swing. So I'm not too worried about that at all. So with Kohli, even though he's directly under Adelaide, I don't think I actually had thought about that. I was thinking more about the entire series. So I'm going to stick with my question mark here, actually, because I'm not 100% sure which way this goes. I think he's still moving pretty well, but he didn't make any runs in this test. But virtually no one made runs in this test, right? They were like 2 guys who passed 50. So I'm not too worried about that. I still think that's a little bit up in the air. And maybe just on the fact that a couple of the extra bouncing deliveries have caused him some troubles, I probably think that that's better for Australia at the moment than India. But I want to see when we get away from Perth and the pink ball. Then we come to Australia's top 3. So I had this as a massive plus for India. I think we have to say that it wasn't a massive plus for India because Australia, through McSweeney and Labuschagne, actually put themselves into a position to go on and win this test match, or at least set it up so that Head could help them win the test match, right? Obviously, Mitch Starc had already done the work, but it would have been very easy for Bumrah and Siraj to rip through that top order again. However, there still is an element here of Usman Khawaja still doesn't look in form to me. McSweeney still doesn't look like an opener. But Marnus, I'm definitely giving a tick. So I gave that as there would be a slight regression in form there. So I'm probably right on that one. And also, I still wasn't 100% sure. I don't think I feel all that different. So yeah, I think I got that one more or less right. Siraj, who ended up becoming the pantomime villain of that last test match. But let's forget about that for a little bit, and why he'd sent someone off who just made 100 against him when he bowled him with a full toss as well. But if we look at his form so far, my big question mark, and you can see there's a literal question mark here, was whether he would keep that rhythm. I think it's fair to say that he actually did keep that rhythm and that I was partially wrong. However, him playing good in this test match didn't actually help India that much. And the issue with India going forward, I don't think changes with Siraj, because he's now played in 2 good tests. They've won 1 and they've lost 1. Does that mean he's going to be able to maintain this rhythm, or will there be a regression? So I'm I'm almost always just question marks with Siraj. I'm never quite sure what we're going to get from moment to moment. Jaiswal, I got that one right. I thought there'd be a bit of a regression. Pink ball test match against, the Australian bowlers, under lights and everything else. I don't think that's a huge concern for him. I've still got a question mark. That's more for the rest of the series, I think, for India. I'm not too worried about the fact he didn't make runs here. I went with the fact that I thought Cummins would be better in this test match, and he was a lot better. There were just enough signs at the end of the Perth test where you're like, oh, okay, it looks like he's coming into some sort of rhythm. Whether he's going to be the great Cummins, which would be a double tick from here on in, I don't know. But at the very least, he looks like an informed and confident one. I like the way he went after the top order. He then brought his bouncer back out. He's a very accurate bouncer and did very well against the tail as well. So I think for Australia, that's probably a double plus, because that's two different jobs that you can give Pat Cummins at the moment. I think this is really a bad thing for India because in the first test, Stark bowled well but didn't really get any wickets. Cummins didn't bowl all that well. Mitch Marsh had to bowl more than Australia would have wanted, and Nathan Lyon didn't do very well, and then Hazelwood was injured. Just one variable there, and putting Cummins in, I think makes it really, really interesting. And I had him in good form. If he's in great form, that's even worse for India. With Stark, I had the double tick. I thought he looked good in Perth. He looked in good rhythm. He didn't get the wickets. He was about to get the pink ball. He was about to go to Adelaide. That was as safe as houses, right? I'm going to triple tick that one, right? Maybe I was a tick under, if anything there. I've done a whole video, of course, that you can go and see about just how good Mitchell Starc is in Adelaide, specifically with the pink ball, some of the technical reasons why the pink ball works for him and everything else. I don't think for the rest of the series, this is as big a problem. In fact, I'm going to double question mark this for the series and for India specifically, because we might have already seen Mitchell Starc's best two test matches, right? That doesn't mean that he's going to be terrible from here on in, but there's a couple of players like Shubman Gill who seem to play him a little bit better, especially with the red ball. He's going to regress because he's not as good with the red ball. He's also been absolutely flying for about a month and a half now. He might start to get tired or maybe lose his rhythm or anything else. So right at the moment, in that test match, it was great, but I still have question marks on it going forward. One thing I said about this test match is that India got the better of the conditions in the first test. I think they earned them by absolutely pulverizing Australia on that first day, but they got the better of the conditions. And so the difference between the two sides is really much more down to the fact that they batted when it was the best time to bat in the game, and they made all the runs. They haven't made any runs at any other stage in this series, right? So I said that the conditions would come back into Australia's favor, and that's broadly what we saw here, right? I think, again, you have to give some credit to Marnus and McSweeney because, they didn't lose wickets. They didn't give that advantage back after Usman Khawaja was out. But all things considered, I thought, well, it's a pink ball and it's in Adelaide. So the conditions were already going to be in Australia's favour, and things did roll for them a little bit. So we got this one right. But it's also a good sign for India because they've had probably, when it comes to actual conditions, their two toughest venues. In fact, we can go straight down here to Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. I've already marked that down as a slight negative for Australia and a plus towards India. It's probably more of a question mark, right? But I would say if I was working for India right now, I'd be looking at everything going, okay, well, these are probably going to be the two toughest tests and it's 1-1. Like, I'm okay with that. But I think there's a couple of other things that we can look at for this series as well. So let's just start again. Okay, so we've got a bunch of new things on the board. We've got Australia on this side, we've got India over here, and a couple of major variables throughout the middle. Of course, the score is 1-1. Nailed it. All right, some of these things are slightly linked to each other. So I want to talk about Boland first. I think Boland is a very interesting player going ahead here. He is probably the hardest player in world cricket to stay in against when you are defending. So India is going to have to attack him. But more interesting is, do we even see Boland in the next test? Does he go back to being a stand-in? And that's, of course, all because of Hazelwood, right? So how you play Boland and what you do against him, India will be thinking about that. But perhaps the more important thing is, do you really want Boland and Hazelwood in the same side? I think you make plenty of arguments that they should be both in the same side. But that then links back to this man, Nathan Lyon. Because the best way of doing that at the moment is by getting rid of Lyon, right? And then picking Boland and having Hazelwood. Of course, I'm making a lot of assumptions here that Hazelwood will come back fully fit anyway, right? And so there's also something quite interesting about when you look at Marsh. I'm not too worried about Marsh's batting at the moment, but I am worried a lot more about his body and his ability to bowl like more than 3 deliveries without hurting himself, right? If Lyon doesn't play, it means that Boland, Hazelwood, Cummins, Starc are all going to have to bowl a lot more, because otherwise they risk their 5th bowler getting injured. So at the moment, they have a fifth bowler in case of emergency. If you have a fully functioning spinner who can bowl like 25 to 30% of your overs, that isn't an issue. You can rotate through all your other seamers. If you don't have that, someone has to bowl the dog overs. That means Hazelwood has to bowl a little bit more, Boland has to bowl a little bit more. He's about to come back from an injury. Pat Cummins and Mitch Starc are two bowlers who don't really want to do the dog overs either. So you either give them to Marsh and he plays as the fifth seamer, that's a lot of seam as well, or you keep Lyon in the side. It's not straightforward. It's not a straightforward decision. In some ways, it's a good one to have though. Then we've got Smith. The question marks about Smith and whether he was going to make runs or not, I thought it was very funny that everyone thought he would go back to number 4, he would suddenly start making a lot of runs, because the reason he went to opening is because he was struggling to make runs at number 4 as well. So this miraculous batting positional change hasn't actually made a difference to Smith just at the moment. The other player that's quite interesting here is Usman Khawaja. These two were opening and batting together not that long ago. Usman Khawaja is still not making runs. And at the moment, if we're being honest, he doesn't look like he's about to make runs. He only got 1 innings in this test match, so he's only batted 3 times in the series so far. It's not the end of the world by any means. But there are certainly question marks on him going ahead. And of course, when he's opening with a player in his 3rd test match, who's not a traditional opener, that's gonna, if he keeps opening up an end, it's not ideal. And it also means that if Usman does keep going out earlier, that means Smith will come in early. So the whole idea of him not batting early, you really need, he was saved by this in the last test match by McSweeney and Marnus batting so well, and he still didn't make any runs. But let's just come over to India here for a moment as well. The main concern at the moment is probably Rohit Sharma, right? A lot of people will say it's his captaincy. I'm not worried about his captaincy at all. If he starts making runs, his captaincy will look a lot better. At the moment, a lot of India's problems does look like the fact that they're not consistently making runs. I don't think it's got anything to do with where he's coming in the order. He's now failed across the order a little bit. Number 6 is a position that he has scored a lot of runs in before, obviously a long, long time ago. He's clearly going through a slump at the moment. No one watching him bat at the moment is thinking that he is in prime form. And what is interesting is, it wasn't that long ago that these two guys were 2 of the best openers in the world. And both of them, of very recent times, have suddenly gone into a slump at exactly the wrong moment. But part of the reason that it's an issue for India is their lack of runs. Like, he needs to make runs because India need to make runs. And if you really think about it, so far they've had 1 good innings. In fact, both teams have had 1 good innings each. Now, it's a bowling series, so we might see a lot of that. But it is putting a lot of pressure on their bowlers being constantly awesome, right? And one of the issues they have at the moment is that 3rd seamer position. I think they probably played a blinder in the first test match with Harshit Rana. He was probably 3rd on some of our depth charts for that 3rd seamer position, and he played really well. And because of that, of course, they kept him around for the next test, where actually that would have probably been better off for a test match for Akash Deep, because it would have suited his bowling more with the pink ball. Now you're going into the 3rd test, which I think will actually suit Harshit Rana a little bit more, but he's probably low on confidence, and India may not be feeling him in the same way that they were before. Then you've got the Prashid Krishna side of it. So suddenly there's a big question mark on the 3rd seamer. And a lot of this is of course linked down to this man here, because this could all be instantly fixed if Mohammad Shami was fit. There's a lot of people who keep saying, oh, he's bowling in these other leagues, he must be ready and everything else. Remember, India are watching him. They will have medical professionals there. They'll be checking how he goes in the game. They'll probably have some sort of technology mapping him. They'll be looking at his rehab and everything else. Just looking at highlights of him or even watching him in the live games doesn't tell you whether he's ready for a test match. If India thought he was ready for a test match, he'd be in Brisbane at the moment hitting the Gabba nets. So at this stage, we have to assume that he's probably not going to play a role in this series, right? Which means that this 3rd seamer position becomes even more important. But there is another way around this that they can look at, which is kind of linked to Australia and the Nathan Lyon thing. They have 2 great spinning all-rounders, and they have Washington Sundar. Like, they have got so much flexibility and different skills that they could throw at Australia. But do they have to use a spinner? They now have Nitish Reddy. He can bat at number 7, and they can have a 3rd seamer and a 4th seamer. Right? They can have both of them in this bucket. One of them can be in the side just to bowl a couple of short start spells and maybe some bouncer spells for them. They've still got the 3 main spinners, and then Nitish Reddy can bowl some of the dog overs if they need as well. The issue is, in the first 2 tests, were probably the places we thought the spin would play a smaller role. It may not, and may not change. Australian wickets are so seam dependent at the moment that it may not matter. But do you really want to go into the next test without a spinner at all? That's the question that they've got to answer. The other way of doing it, of course, is that you keep your spinner, but Nitesh Reddy goes out, and then you play 4 frontline seamers behind your number 7 who can bat, be Washington or Ravi Jadeja. The issue then is that they have a weak number 8 and their top order's not making runs. It's not perfect, but that is another option for them as well. And then I've got Travis Head here, and I've got Jasprit Bumrah. And what links both of these players at the moment is they both look like when they get going, there's nothing that the opposition can really do about them, right? He is already injured. That is a bit of a concern. He was dropped a couple of times and has a lot of pressure on him as a number 5, especially if the guys above him don't make many runs. Bumrah can be over-bowled, he can be busted, he can be cramped, he can be just plain tired. That's another reason why you might want the 4-seamer, but it's also another reason you might want the spinner, especially someone who's very good at holding. It's also why Mitch Marsh is quite important over here, because if he can bat the way that he's been batting, he takes a lot of pressure off Head, because it suddenly means that India have to go up against them as a 2-headed monster. So I think this series is absolutely fascinating where it is set up at the moment and where it can go from here. And I think both teams, when they start to think about what had happened in the first 2 tests at the moment, will probably be fairly happy, which is a very weird situation to be. India will be like, well, we played the 2 harder surfaces and we got 2-1-all. Australia will be like, we played a horrible test and got absolutely smashed out of the park in the first match, and then we won by 10 wickets in the second one. Like, both teams, as we stand here, have plenty of issues that they're still going to have to work through and understand. But there's also a lot of positives. But if there's anything we know about Test cricket in 2024, it doesn't matter what we predict next. It could be 4-1. It could be 1-4, right? It's absolute madness this year. So we just have to sit back, hold on, and enjoy the ride.